Good afternoon. It's Sunday, and thank you for joining me for our Moment for All. If you return to school this week, I hope it's been a good return to school and a time to catch up with your friends and teachers and to feel that maybe life is returning to a little bit of normal as you move into these final weeks of school. It's a beautiful day when I'm recording this, and we live in a beautiful place, don't we? We live in a beautiful country, and I know in school you learn much about the rich history of our province and of our country. And though we live in a country that is beautiful and a history that is rich with so many traditions, it's also a country that has some sore spots, maybe some wounds and scars in our history. For we haven't always respected one another. We haven't always treated one another with love and kindness and compassion. This week, many of us who would name ourselves as settlers, people whose ancestors came to this country and settled on the land we now call Canada, have been thinking about our siblings who are the original peoples, the indigenous peoples, the aboriginal peoples of our land, and how they have not always been treated with respect or kindness or love. This week we've been thinking about a hard piece in our Canadian history. It's the history of residential schools. They were schools set up by our government, often run by churches, and Indigenous or First Nations children were taken from their families, from their communities, and were placed in these schools. These schools were often hundreds of miles away from where their families and their communities were. They went to school never to see their families again. They were not allowed to speak their language or practice their culture or traditions, and many were hurt and abused. And thousands died at those schools. They never went home. Their families never knew what happened to their children. Today, for our Moment for All, I want to share with you two videos. The first is the story about a woman by the name of Phyllis Webstad. And you may have heard her story before. It's a story of how she was treated at a residential school. And it's her story that became the inspiration for what we now name as Orange Shirt Day. Now, Orange Shirt Day is in September, and perhaps on September 30th you wore an orange shirt to school, remembering Phyllis's story and how the residential school students were treated. Orange Shirt Day is a way for us to commit ourselves to remembering the story and also to live in kindness, to respect, to want to know about the traditions and cultures that are not our own. This week, many people have been taking out their orange shirts and remembering the 215 students of the Kamloops Residential School. The second video is a storybook, and it's called When I Was 8. And again, it's based on a true story. It's the story of Margaret Pokiak-Fenton, who was an Inuit student at a residential school. And Margaret tells her story of what it meant for her to attend a residential school. But it's also a story of resilience, a story of commitment, a story of a decision to be a strong, spirited person and to survive. And so there's two videos we'll be seeing today. But before we watch these stories, I invite you just to pause for a moment, because sometimes when life is tough, when the news we hear is hard, sometimes when we feel sad, It's important for us just to pause. And for me, this week, I've been taking time to pause in prayer, to be reminded that in all and through all, we're not alone. God is with us. So please, if you're gathering by yourself or with your parents or grandparents, let us all take a moment to pause in prayer. Let us pray. Creator, when we are sad, be with us. Creator, when we feel fearful, help us to be brave. Creator, when we are angry, help us to breathe and find others that we can talk to. Creator, may we respect each and every person we meet. May our words be gentle. May our actions be kind. May we live in your way. May we live in your love. Blessed be. Amen. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy these 2 videos. And I hope that we always remember that every child matters. And so let us live with kindness and compassion and respect this day and always. See you soon. Take care.
Hello everyone, my name is Phyllis Webstad. I am Shawetmch from the Strachamch, Kenno Creek, Chatltam, Dog Creek First Nation, which is about 1.5 hours southwest from Williams Lake, BC. I grew up with my granny on the Dog Creek Reserve until I was 10, then moved with my auntie after she finished university. When I had just turned 6, I was sent to the St. Joseph Indian Residential School near Williams Lake, a place we called the Mission. My granny bought me a shiny new orange shirt to go to school in. When I got there, I was stripped, my clothing taken away, including my new orange shirt, and I never saw it again. I was no longer excited to be going to school. I wanted to go home to Granny. I had to stay there for 300 sleeps. No matter how much all of us little kids cried, it didn't matter. No one listened to us. Our feelings didn't matter. We didn't matter. I am the 3rd generation that attended residential school. Both my grandmother and mother attended the mission for 10 years each. Today is a day to honor and remember residential school survivors and their families. Every child matters, even if you're an adult. We must also remember those children that never made it and are no longer with us. Today is a day for survivors to tell their stories and for us to listen with open hearts. I am humbled and honored that you are all taking part in Orange Shirt Day. When I was in school, I didn't know my own history, so I am overjoyed that you are taking part and learning the true history of Canada's First Peoples. Guksjem, thank you.
When I Was 8, written by Christy Jordan Fenton and Margaret Pokiak-Fenton. Art by Gabrielle Grimard. I knew many things when I was 8. I knew how to keep the sled dogs quiet while Father snuck up on Caribou, and to bring the team to him after a kill. I knew the sun slept in the winter and woke in the summer. And I knew that when the sun-warmed Arctic Ocean shrugged off its slumbering ice, we would cross it to trade furs with the outsiders. but I did not know how to read the outsiders' books. It was not enough to hear them from my older sister, Rosie. I longed to read them for myself. Although I begged like a hungry dog after scraps, Father would not let me go to the outsiders' school like Rosie. He knew things about the school that I did not. But my name is Uliman. That's Uliman, the stubborn stone that sharpens the half-moon ulu knife used by our women. I wore away at him all through the winter, and when the sun awoke again and we traveled to trade with the outsiders, he reluctantly left me at their school. A black-cloaked nun cut my hair. I felt naked as my braids fell to the floor. Stripped of my warm parka, I was made to wear a thin pinafore and scratchy underwear, with stockings too small to stay above my knees. My Inuit name was taken, and I was to be called Margaret. All I had left was a beautiful book my sister read me about a girl named Alice. I hugged it to my chest and tried to be brave like the girl in the story. Every day for weeks we woke very early for chores. Instead of sitting at desks, we scrubbed the floor beneath them. We washed walls and dishes and laundry, and then we went to church and I kneeled on our already aching knees to clean our souls. I worked hard, but it brought me no closer to being able to read. When the first skiff of snow returned and my hopes were nearly dead, the kindly head nun led us to a classroom and told us to be seated. At last we were going to read. Behind the teacher's desk sat the nun who had cut my hair. I didn't want her for a teacher, but I sat very tall so she would know I was eager. A few older girls raised their hands, so I did too. The nun laughed and motioned for me to stand and read. Read? I couldn't even speak English. I scowled at her as the others giggled. Instead of learning to read that day, I spent the rest of the class with my nose in the corner and my stockings slouched around my ankles. The nun constantly gave me extra chores, as part of my education, she said. But though my muscles ached from the hard work, and I could barely keep my eyes open, she would not wear out my determination. I used every task as an opportunity to learn new words. I studied each letter of the alphabet before wiping it from the board. I looked at the labels on cleaning supplies and sounded out the words. I even studied the writing beneath pictures in the hall. These things improved my reading, but I longed to read an actual book. My book. One evening, I hurried through my supper of cabbage soup, planning a hasty escape. I couldn't wait anymore. I dashed into the hall, but the nun was waiting for me. "Not so fast, Margaret. There are pots to be scrubbed," she said in a threatening tone, and marched me to the kitchen. With my arms in scalding water up to my elbows, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "I could be reading," I muttered. "What?" the nun demanded, her shoes creaking as she crossed the kitchen. She pinned me against the sink. Slowly, a smile spread across her thin lips. "Fetch me a cabbage from the basement," she ordered. I'd heard stories of children who disappeared down in that dark cavern. I descended each step deliberately, hiding my fear. My hands quickly found a cabbage in the shadows, and I scurried up the stairs, but she slammed the door, shutting out all light. I pulled the handle. It was locked. A scream built in my chest, but I held it in. I closed my eyes, pulled up my stockings, and breathed deeply until I could feel my father's presence. He wrapped his arms around me in the darkness, and I spelled out my Inuit name to him, whispering, O-L-E-M-A-U-N. His proud smile made me stronger, so I worked through the name of my distant home, B-A-N-K-S-I-S-L-A-N-D. I spelled many things from my home, and I was starting on the title of my book, A-L-I, when the door opened. I squeezed past the nun and returned to the sink. Her angry black eyes raised goosebumps on the back of my shaved neck, but she could not make me cry. When I returned to the dorm room that night, all the girls were giddy. Everyone had beautiful new dark stockings. I pulled off my old ones, took my place in front of the nun, held out my hands and closed my eyes. The nun cackled loudly as she handed my pair to me. Laughter instantly filled the room. They're red, I stammered in disbelief. Only circus clowns wore red stockings. I ran to my bed and opened my book. I stared at the letters, holding back my tears until those letters became words, which grew into a familiar story. I could almost hear my sister's voice reading about the cruel queen, and I let the story carry me far away from the laughter. The next morning I crept quietly to breakfast, but an older girl saw me and called out, "Fatty legs!" as bits of food fell from her mouth. "Fatty face!" I shouted back. "F-A-T-T!" A nun swooped in. "If you cannot get along with others, you can tend to the laundry," she hissed. I entered the laundry and stood beside the large vat with the fire crackling beneath it. And then an idea came to me. I knew what to do with my stockings. I burned them to ashes. I felt like Alice after a bite of magic cake, as large as the entire room. When the nun saw my bare legs, she exploded. "Margaret, put on your stockings," she demanded. I set my jaw and crossed my arms. "I can't." "Why not?" "I just can't." Her face grew very red, and she ordered everyone to search the room. Like the queen's henchmen in my book, they scurried around, upturning everything. Books were torn from shelves and blankets from beds. No one was calling me fatty legs now, and no amount of searching could ever bring those stockings back. The nun snarled when I was allowed another pair. In my new thick gray stockings, I felt victorious. But when I strode into class the next day, the nun slammed a book on my desk. It was a green reader, like the older girls used. "Page 34, she said. She wanted to cut me down to size. I opened the book, nervousness swelling in my throat. I looked at the words and began slowly, twisting my tongue around the consonants and forming my mouth around the vowels. By the second paragraph, I confidently sliced through the words without a single moment of hesitation. There was no stopping me. When I finished, I looked up, but the nun was facing the blackboard. "Sit down, Margaret," she said. I felt a great happiness inside that I dared not show. I quietly took my seat. I was Ulimon, conqueror of evil, reader of books. I was a girl who traveled to a strange and faraway land to stand against a tyrant, like Alice. And like Alice, I was brave, clever, and as unyielding as the strong stone that sharpens an ulu. I finally knew this, like I knew many things, because now I could read.